From the Lean Enterprise Institute in Boston, this is the WLEI Podcast, where we share stories of people making the world better through lean thinking and practice. For more information about LEI, including how we can help you apply lean thinking, please visit lean.org.
Hi, everybody. I'm Josh Howell, President of the Lean Enterprise Institute. In this special dual edition release of the Design Brief and the Manager Brief, I'm joined by LEI veterans Jim Morgan and Mark Reich. These two lean heavyweights in this episode discuss two fundamental lean processes that are absolutely critical to transform and grow an enterprise: lean product and process development, aka LPPD, and hoshin kanri. Jim is a former global engineering director at Ford and chief operating officer at Rivian. He co-authored with Jeff Leiker the Toyota Product Development System and Designing the Future, both of which explore elements of LPPD, a system for developing new products and services, and their required value streams. LPPD surfaces and resolves issues across the product development value stream in order to minimize time and profit-consuming wastes and rework. Mark, a 23-year veteran of Toyota, including an executive role in corporate strategy, recently authored Managing on Purpose, which explores hoshin kanri and how it aligns enterprises at every level, C-suite through the front line, via a shared common purpose, problem solving, and continuous learning. Since 2011, when Mark joined LEI, he has successfully helped many executives apply hoshin kanri in order to transform and grow their businesses across a variety of sectors. For executives who may listen and may not be familiar with LPPD and hoshin kanri, especially those who are leading and growing lean enterprises, this discussion should be eye-opening. Jim and Mark reveal these two processes as not operations-only tools, but rather game-changing methods for corporate leaders to transform their organizations. They describe the importance of these powerful processes to overall business success. They talk about their experiences at Toyota and with other lean organizations, and they talk about how these processes can significantly help any business, big or small. Okay, so with that, let's get into it.
All right. So thanks, Jim. Thanks, Mark, for joining us. So I want to start with what I believe is a provocative statement. Of course, someone who declares that their statement is provocative, does that in fact make it provocative? I'm not sure. But in any case, that's how I want to begin. And, both of you, I've had the chance to get to know and work with over the course of the years. And I guess exposure to your respective areas of expertise, Jim with lean product and process development, Mark with hoshin kanri, has led me to a postulation. And that is that hoshin kanri and lean product and process development are basically the same thing. You've each written books about these disciplines. You've each written multiple articles. I've gone so far as to joke that I could go into an article written by Jim Morgan, find and replace LPPD with hoshin kanri, and the article would still read fine. And I could do the inverse with something that you've written, Mark. This is sort of my starting position here. So of course, these methodologies have different language, different terminology, different context. But it seems to me, not as an expert in the way that you two are, that they are fundamentally similar. So today, I guess, through the questions that I prepared, I'm interested to explore the differences and the similarities between hoshin kanri and lean product and process development. So perhaps you'll convince me otherwise, or perhaps you agree, and we can find some common ground that way. So to get started, I guess with that premise that hoshin kanri and lean product and process development are basically the same thing, Mark, starting with you, what would be your kind of immediate reaction to that claim?
You're right. Let's move on. No, I would say that that's kind of like you could ask the question about the Toyota production system, or you could ask that question and its relationship to hoshin kanri, or lean and the Toyota production system. I mean, I think I think lean product and process development, Jim would acknowledge, came out of the its birth came from primarily Toyota. Hoshin Kanri's birth, though not exclusive to Toyota, Toyota was a very early adopter in the 1960s. So it's kind of natural that there would be crossover in terms of the thinking. And I would say I go as far as saying, in terms of the fundamental thinking, like what we might call the philosophy or the basic thinking, it's probably very similar. And in fact, what little I know of lean product and process development, I think we often find that probably some of the tools that are introduced in my book are also things that lean product and process development might use. I would just say, and probably maybe final thought is just as we go through this, maybe this is provocative, I don't know, but I think of Hoshin Kanri in the context of both long and midterm kind of strategic planning for the organization as a whole. And that may differ slightly from depending on the focus of the organization than lean product and process development. But that's my conjecture.
Yeah, so certainly not an expert in Hoshin Kanri as Mark is. And I guess looking at this discussion as a sort of journey of exploration. And we'll see what we learn along the way. I agree with Mark that some of the foundational thinking is going to be really similar, if not identical. I mean, I think they're both systems for focusing the organization on creating value. And I think in that sense, probably has a lot in common. I think that product development needs to be really tightly linked with Hoshin Kanri because, again, Josh, you and I have talked about this before. I think of your product as the value you create for your customer, whether that's, a truck or an airplane or a service, whatever it happens to be. And product development is the way that you deliver that, the way you create it and deliver it to your customer. And so that needs to be an important part of Hoshin Kanri. And Hoshin Kanri also has to tie product development thinking to the rest of the organization. So back in 2006, I guess the book came out, Jeff and I talked to Toyota about this strategy deployment work. And at the time, one of their initiatives or one of their areas of focus was on environmental sustainability. And that became a really critical driver in product development around different products that they created, such as the Prius, such as Echoes, and there's other examples. And it also drove changes in operations to make things more environmentally sustainable. More recently, in the Designing the Future book, Toyota shared with us TNGA, the Toyota New Global Architecture. And that was in response to a drive to improve efficiency and reduce cost and things like that at a really challenging time at Toyota. And that's, and so that was part of an effort that was aligned with a larger strategic directive from the organization. And interestingly enough, I'll just wrap up with this. A couple of weeks ago, in some discussions with some Toyota folks, TNGA is still alive and well. When we first talked about it, I think it was pretty limited to their maybe C platform vehicles. Now it's moved out. It's part of RAV4. It's part of Camry. It's part of, right? So they've continued to build this momentum, even to Daihatsu. There's now a DNGA, Daihatsu New Global Architecture, and it's continues to create a big advantage, I think, for them. Tying strategy back to activities.
Awesome. All right. So we're off and running. Let the exploration begin. So, both Hoshin and LPPD are systems for innovation at their core. I know Mark talks a lot about Hoshin Kanri as a system for innovating the business. Of course, in its name, LPPD is a methodology for innovation inside products. So maybe a first question that I'll begin, and since Mark kicked us off on that last question. I'll start with you, Jim. How is it that each of these methodologies define and drive alignment around purpose, priorities, and fundamental direction?
Yeah, so with LPPD, there's at least two levels. There's one that's sort of a higher level strategy that goes across product lines. That's often represented by what we call a cycle plan. And that's what products we need in different markets. It's sort of a very strategic view of product development. And then if you come down a level to the individual program, that's led by the chief engineer, who starts with a study period, or what they used to call, I don't know if they do anymore, but they used to call Kento. And during that study period, the chief engineer and a small team spends a great deal of time understanding how to create specific value for that particular customer. And the results of that study period is a concept paper. And that concept paper aligns the rest of the program team or organization around the vision for this specific product and a rough high-level sort of plan of how we're going to deliver that. And then that's circulated, much as I understand hoshin kanri is. So you can do sort of a catch-ball process. I don't know if that's the right term, Mark, but where you get input from the various functions on the best ways to deliver that particular value. And that drives innovation then. You create some conflict because you have cost, you have quality, you have innovation, and you're trying to work within these constraints. And that conflict, I would argue, creates innovation that's all driven by delivering value to the customer.
Awesome. Mark, how about you? So with hoshin kanri.
Well, what Jim just said kind of proved our point from the answer to your first question. But many of the things that Jim spoke to relative to lean process development are like, particularly the fundamental thinking and practices points are, I would say, very similar to hoshin kanri. And so, except thinking about it at the corporate level. So, a fundamental part of hoshin kanri that's, to speak to your points of driving alignment on purpose, priorities, and directions. I mean, this is, I realized, of course, I had led this activity in Toyota. Coming out of Toyota, I saw how challenging it was for many organizations who didn't have that alignment. It seems like, I don't know, it seems like a very, I would say, misunderstood, or the understanding of it is low relative to the value of that moving forward. And it relates to, to Jim's point about how products get developed and what products are critical for the organization, but also on a bigger scale, what the organization will focus on as its overall corporate priorities for the company. And so too many organizations, I was just in one last week, tend to function in silos, and some of that is driven often by how the leaders get measured, and consequently that the activities that are produced, or the initiatives that come out of that don't necessarily support each other across the organization. So one of the primary things we talk about in the book that I put together on managing on purpose is this horizontal alignment and vertical alignment, which have two very different purposes. The horizontal alignment mostly being just to get agreement from the top leadership on what will the priorities be. And then secondly, the vertical alignment, which is where where I believe the innovation comes from, is ultimately, innovation comes from the work, whatever type of work it is, whether it's work in the factory or work in product development. And so the more we can drive decision-making and learning and innovation to the lower levels of the organization, so that people own initiatives that relate to those higher level corporate objectives, the more we'll get innovation out of those. And I think you want that to be, to a certain extent, aligned to the corporate direction, the vision, because obviously it's fun for everybody to innovate in their own jobs, but You want to innovate for the purpose of the improvement of the business. So,
well, so let's maybe like continue to build on that then for my next question. So you just touched upon both horizontal alignment and vertical alignment. My next question really gets at the vertical alignment, and you've spoken to it a little bit just in the answer that you just gave, but to make it kind of explicit, starting with you, Mark, how do these systems, so we'll start with Hoshin Kanri, connect strategy to execution? And what are the mechanisms that help kind of close the gap between those two things so that they don't kind of wander off in different directions and result in misalignment and wasted resources and time and all that kind of stuff?
well, honestly speaking, I mean, in my experience and what I had in Toyota versus what I see outside, that's one of the two. We'll talk about the other one probably a little bit later. But it's one of the two like major reasons organizations struggle, I think. A group of executives, sometimes with an outside consultant or something, put together a vision for the organization and a strategy, is represented as a strategy. It's often restricted only to financial goals of the organization. And consequently, it becomes very difficult to take those high-level statements and make them into something that's actionable in the organization if you don't involve the middle levels, the lower levels of people in the organization. So the mechanism in Hoshin Kanri that does that is this, you just brought it up again, this vertical catch ball. But it's really practical in terms of vertical catch ball, interestingly enough, is not only a top-down thing, at least in Toyota it was, both a bottom-up thing too. So organizations that you develop a corporate Hoshin, your priorities for the company. The next level down, like in Toyota, every plant, as an example, or even like to speak to Jim's to the product development side, product development itself would develop its own Hoshin. And that Hoshin, of course, should connect to the upper level Hoshin. So that's one way that things get kind of made more explicit, Josh. But it's also the opportunity for the organization to take kind of initiative on its own. There are things that the organization may want to tackle that the corporation doesn't necessarily see as a big priority for the corporation overall, or require like a lot of collaboration across the company. And so that's one step. But then those things, even at that level, at the functional level or the plant level, I mean, some of those things, that's still going to be fairly I would say not specific. So Toyota used A3 and other types of problem solving to take those issues and break them down to like actionable things. And linking all that together in a plan is kind of the secret, the formula that when I've helped organizations since I've been out of Toyota has kind of given some level of success.
So Jim, how about you on the topic of aligning strategy with execution? You spoke a little bit to the high level cycle plan, the product specific concept papers. And so, I mean, that implies some connection between those two things flying at different flight levels, but maybe you can elaborate even more on how strategy gets connected to execution in LPPD.
Yeah, so I guess there's two ways at the corporate level. One, as you mentioned, I talked about the cycle plan, which looks across all the various product lines and identifies opportunity to create value, opportunity to improve the value that you're offering. And they identify, or that work identifies, specific vehicle lines or product lines that you're going to work on. And then at the next level down, it's up to the chief engineer and his or her team to determine exactly how we're going to do that, right? What that vision looks like. And then at the next level down from there, the various functions, let's say the engineering function says, let's say we want to improve ride and handling on a particular vehicle to make it more competitive in that particular market segment. It's up to the engineering team to determine how they're going to do that, right? So are we going to improve torsional stiffness? Are we going to, change, some other architecture strategy? Are we going to try to take weight out by using, different materials? Are we going to change the balance of the vehicle? That's driven largely by the expertise. And so it starts way at the top of the organization and works its way all the way down to the individual engineer. And that's one of the most powerful things about the way Toyota and good product development organizations operate, is that there's a clear connection from the work that the engineer is doing. He or she can see how that work is connected to this bigger strategic initiative, or this larger idea. The other way that it happens is on general sort of strategic initiatives, maybe around efficiency. As I mentioned with TNGA, wasn't a specific program initiative. This was a larger initiative that PD agreed to do that worked across different vehicle lines. And so that work went on sort of both outside and within program teams in order to make that happen. So those are the two primary paths, as I see, that product development work gets tied directly to strategic output.
So Jim, you talked about the role of, or you referenced the chief engineer, I think maybe even a couple of times already, which of course is a very integral role. They're also, that chief engineer isn't participating in this work representing a given function, right? They're representing the product, the product's customers, like that's kind of who they're advocating for, or what they're advocating for, I guess. I think there's maybe in some ways a similar role, although sometimes it does get tied to a function with like a hoshin objective owner inside the hoshin kanri realm. But maybe whether it's highlighting the work that the chief engineer does, or just some other mechanisms might be in place. Jim, could you elaborate a little bit on how cross-functional collaboration, or that sort of like horizontal collaboration, is facilitated with LPPD?
Yeah, that is the key to the chief engineer's role, is the ability to work horizontally across what is typically a very vertical organization. That's both the key and the challenge to that role, quite honestly. And Josh, you've heard me talk a lot about creating new value streams as opposed to just creating products in isolation. And in order to create a new value stream, and what I mean by that is every step required to deliver value to your customer. So that would be design, engineering, manufacturing, maybe logistics, installation, serviceability, right? If you think about the life cycle of that product, making up that entire value stream, being very intentional about the way you design that for your customer. And in order to do that, you need to get input from all of those people in those various organizations. And so one of the keys to successful LPPD is engaging across functions, right? To be able to deliver that value stream and take those inputs right from the start, right from the study phase, as you start to think about creating more value for your customer. And that concept paper that I talked about is a really key way to align those various individuals and really get the whole team focused on this new value proposition and getting them all sort of working in the same direction.
Mark, how about you? Horizontal cross-functional collaboration within hoshin.
So you're asking a little bit about like the mechanics of it?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, in the process of, I want to speak about the mechanics, but also speak about some of the basic thinking based on what Jim just said. But the mechanics are, speak to what happened in Toyota specifically, is fundamentally what would happen is the top leaders of the organization, and maybe 10 to 12 people, come together. And of course, they're leaders of functions, but they're given the assignment led by the CEO to come up with what are the priorities of the organization for the coming, it could be 3 or 4 years, but definitely for the coming year. And how do we, determine what those should be? And they should be kind of driven by what the business priorities are and what the market, like the inputs from the market, the product, the customer, all those potential inputs that aren't obviously, if you think about like what are an organization's goals and what they need to achieve, the organization needs to achieve, it's not going to be limited for the most part, usually to any given function. So you're going to end up with a list of priorities that are like broad and to be accomplished, have to be accomplished by working across the organization. So getting alignment, first of all, and in Toyota, in a very mature organization, when I was there, we had done hoshin for 50 years. And, you know, usually we had 6 or 7 priorities for the whole organization, and I tell organizations 3 to 5. So if you're trying to get to that number, I mean, you've got to kind of prioritize things and get alignment on that. So the mechanism of it, to some extent, is building that alignment among that team. And sometimes people will disagree. CEO might need to step in to resolve some issues. But I think and the basic principle part I wanted to speak to that, we talk about commonality today between LPPD and hoshin is that, in Toyota, I mean, a fundamental principle is teamwork, and then development of people. Let's talk about those 2 things. But both of those things, one of the things that Toyota is successful about is that those are in the service of business goals. It's not just, we don't do teamwork only because we want to get along. Of course, we want to get along, but we do it in service of business goals. And so if you think about it that way, okay, and actually, I believe teamwork and people development helps us achieve our business goals, by the way. So how do you accomplish that through the mechanisms of alignment across the organization, like giving responsibility to leaders that goes beyond their kind of functional role? I think those type of things kind of are to a certain extent necessary to achieve the strategy and to like accomplish our business goals based on that fundamental thinking of teamwork, developing people.
All right. Thanks, you guys. So maybe a few things that I guess are kind of explicitly different, but I don't know, underlying the differences may, again, we may just sort of find the bedrock of commonality. So let's talk rhythm and cadence. So how do the time frames differ between hoshin kanri, which I know, Mark, you often talk about that as both an annual cycle for kind of the hoshin plan, but also a process that helps facilitate the organization looking some number of years out, and LPPD, where the development of a new product or even the refresh of an existing product line may take more or perhaps less time than kind of annual. So Mark, maybe you could talk a little bit about just kind of rhythm and cadence and kind of the timing that exists inside of a hoshin kanri management system. And then Jim, I'll ask you about it and we'll look for some similarities and differences.
Well, it's a really interesting question. I would say, I can't speak for Jim, but I mean, a product obviously has a life cycle, and developing it and like producing it and then eventually developing another product has given life cycle. Interestingly enough, in the world that I've encountered outside of Toyota and relative to strategy, there's really no life cycle. Of course, organizations sometimes put in place a vision that they might want to achieve in 5 years or 10 years. But I would say in like the rigor of being able to execute on that, I haven't encountered that situation much beyond Toyota. And I think part of what why hoshin kanri has that or possesses that came out of a little bit of the origins of it. It came out originally from the total quality management movement, Deming, with effectively and efficiently putting in a cycle of PDCA to the organization. What hoshin kanri did and Toyota kind of, I think, as an originator of this, they said we need quality not just in our product development processes, in our production processes. We need quality across the organization among management and how we manage. So in order to do that effectively, you kind of need to have a process in order to have effective, I would say, quality, you need to manage that quality to a process, and because strategy is a little bit longer term. But let's just take, Toyota just kind of, I don't know if it's arbitrary, obviously many companies look at their financial situation deeply on an annual basis. So let's look at that, our strategy, and review the rigor of the process of executing on it on an annual basis. I think that's maybe the background.
Tim, how about you? What would you say about rhythm, cadence, timing?
Again, it varies by what level you're looking at. Cycle plans are typically issued on an annual basis. Sometimes they're updated in the course of the year if there's significant changes in the marketplace. Within an individual program, it varies a lot. Is it a 18-month refresh, or is it a 4-year all new program? That kind of varies by the definition of the program, obviously. And then within the program itself, there's a critical cadence that we talk about a lot, and that's the OBEA system, which is typically meeting each week in the OBEA, but that can happen, that can change. Early on, the OBEA meetings are not quite as often. They might be every couple of weeks because the speed, the clock speed of the work being done, sort of drives the need to get together, right? You don't want to be meeting unnecessarily. As you get closer to launch, you're probably meeting every day, at least the launches that I've been on, to kind of track where you're at and problem solve and deal with the challenges that you're running into. So that cadence varies both across and within programs, depending on where they are in their development.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, Jim just brought up the OBEA. I talk about it's in my book too, the OBEA. And I think that's when we talk about crossover. I mean, Toyota developed all this thinking, and I would say it's not exclusive to LPPD. It's not exclusive to hoshin. In Toyota, we used OBEAs to manage a new product launch in a factory, for example, and like the preparation for that. But I think what's the concept that's very common, that is the OBEA kind of allows you to visualize and see progress on things you can't typically see. You don't make visual. It's bringing work out of the computer and making it visible so people can collaborate. And I think that's, so Toyota kind of had this fundamental thinking that we can see a product that runs down the assembly line getting made every 60 seconds, a car. It's pretty easy to visualize, are we ahead or behind in that situation? But it's not so easy to do that when you're developing a new product that may take years. You're developing a hoshin that may take 1, 2, 3 years to do. And so I think I think that's the fundamental thinking and around some of the tools might be slightly different in the cadence, but the fundamental thinking around OBEA for both LPPD and hoshin would, I think, be very similar.
Jim?
I want to build on what Mark said, because it goes back to what he said about teamwork and developing people. The OBEA is key to developing collaboration across functions, to building teamwork, to developing a common understanding of where the program is and what the challenges are, to understanding the dependencies across the functions, is all sort of brought out not only by what's up on the walls, but probably more importantly by the discussion that happens when these teams come together. And that discussion and that experience leads directly to people development. I think it's one of the most powerful ways to expose people to the broader organization, to how we, the leadership behaviors that we expect in our organizations, how we go about solving problems in our organization. All of that is on display at a good OBEA meeting, and it's a tremendous people development opportunity, and sometimes that's lost on companies.
Check on that.
That's great. That's great. Before I move on to what is my kind of next question here, maybe I could just ask both of you guys to speak to why something like cadence in your mind within kind of the disciplines of of LPPD and hoshin kanri, why cadence is so important. And I guess I'm bringing that up in part because, as I read a lot about, tech companies, for example, I hear often sort of a rejection of cadence, or at least as a customer of many of those tech companies, I can't discern much cadence in, let's say, product releases on like the product side of things. And then I know, Mark, you and I have talked about some arguments that are out there that sort of reject the notion of kind of cadencing strategy work on whatever cadence that may be, annual or every 3 months or something like that, and to instead only engage in the work of developing and planning and kind of deploying strategy when a need arises. How you know that a need has arisen, I guess kind of gets it. Perhaps the argument for why you think cadence inside hoshin kanri is important. So I don't know, Jim, we can start with you. Back to you, Mark, but just cadence, like, what is the role of cadence? Why do you feel like cadence is important inside LPPD, and then Mark inside hoshin kanri?
Yeah, I think it's critically important. In fact, there's an equation that I often share with people. Transparency plus cadence equals accountability minus drama. And it's this whole idea of, in fact, Mullally used to say at Ford, that's okay, we'll be back next week, right? So you can count on this cadence, and it builds accountability into the process because we're not going to just let it go. We're going to come back next week and see where we're at, right? It's also tied to the, it's okay to be red, right? It's okay to surface problems. It's not okay to stay red. We have to solve these problems, and we're going to continue to work together at this cadence to do that. And so people can rely on that, that we're going to be back next week and we're going to talk about this again. I think it's very powerful.
Yeah, I can only maybe supplement a little bit what Jim said. There's the whole if there's an argument that cadence is not important. That's interesting because if anything, the last 3 or 4 years taught us this, like, big things can happen that can disrupt your business significantly, regardless of what industry you're in. And pandemics, what's happening recently with tariffs. I mean, those are things that are impacting businesses significantly. And those are just 2 examples. So that those kind of things impact, those external environmental factors, whether they be political or the competition, or I would also say, the expectations of customers is like grown much. Customers in a good way, have become much more demanding, and so you kind of got to keep track of that in some cadence, or else you're always reacting to whatever external environmental issue may occur. Some of this stuff you can potentially plan and foresee through risk management, but also just being on top of that on a monthly, semi-annually, annual basis on like how you're doing. And it's actually not excluded to externally, but internally. Environmental things, leaders leave. I mean, there's a whole bunch of potential things that can impact the progress of your organization. So I think building cadence is key.
Okay, so move on then. My next question: who owns and leads the process in each case? What does that say about their respective role in the organization? Mark, we'll start with you. I think you essentially had the role, at least the role of a process owner with hoshin kanri at Toyota for a number of years. But can you talk a little bit about sort of ownership of the process and kind of how that ownership, the work of that owner is carried out?
Well, I think it's Toyota. One of the interesting components of Toyota's like organizational structure, and I guess maybe it's not. I don't know if it's completely unique. Is that Toyota had? I want to speak to your question actually in 2 ways, but So Toyota has like primary value driving functions. Like we make a car, we develop the car. I mean, those are things that the customer is paying for. But a lot of other functions support and kind of control are meant to support, I'll say, and to some extent control that delivery of that value to the customer. So like a big important function in Toyota is production control. Production control in Toyota manages on a like long-term basis, years, based on what products are coming in the pipeline and based on like capacity constraints at the plants, all the way down to like daily in the month, what's going to actually be made according to Toyota's production plan and the resources we have available. So there are a lot of functions like that in Toyota, and Toyota's decided that corporate strategy and the way they execute on corporate strategy would also be that type of like support and control function. So my role in Toyota, when I was leading Hoshin Kanri as a part of corporate strategy, was to design the process so it's effective. In a way, that's kind of the lead portion of the job. But then it's not my job to honestly for the objectives that get chosen. The success doesn't ride on me. It rides on the functional leaders who might be leading the different initiatives. So how to engage them, how to support the organization to use that process, to standardize the process, to garner their engagement and work together as a team was a critical part of the role too.
How about you, Jim? What would you say about kind of ownership over the LPPD process?
Yeah, so that's a tough question, honestly. There's typically a group that is tasked with developing the overall product development process, say the key milestones or integration points that the programs will work to. And within the program, there's a program manager who works for the chief engineer that's, more or less responsible to make sure that the sort of trains are running on time, that we're hitting milestones, both, the intent of the milestones as well as the milestones themselves. That's one aspect of leading the product development process. But within the functions themselves, they often have what's called PDPs or individual development plans for the parts that they're going to work on. If you think about a car, that might be a body side or a fender or a deck lid or whatever. That work has to connect to the overall program work, and that's typically done through a PDP or some other mechanism that identifies where you should be in your engineering work at what point in the program. So that's seeing normal from abnormal, one way to do that. That's an important part. But there's also the higher level roles of, I think of so it's fundamentally a matrix organization. On one side, you have the sort of product organization, which starts with product line executives, and then chief engineers who lead individual products within those product lines. But on the functional side, which is where most of the resources are responsible for developing those people and developing excellence within that discipline. So what we used to say is that the product side is responsible for developing great products, and the functional side is responsible for developing great people in order to execute those plans, because without those skill sets, obviously it's impossible to deliver the product plan. So I felt like I maybe wandered around a little bit there, but that's a tough question, and we could probably talk about it for a whole hour.
All right. Well, a good start to that hour-long conversation. We'll tee that up for next time. Okay, so I think the next thing I want to get into is how Hoshin Kanri and LPPD treat learning. And Jim, we'll start with you. What are some of the mechanisms that are in place within LPPD for learning, for adaptation. And then, Mark, I'll turn to you with the same question.
Yeah, just a couple examples. So learning and knowledge reuse is at the core of LPPD, just like developing value streams is. It's a core principle. It starts at the beginning of the program during that study period that I was talking about. That's all focused on learning. It's understanding your customer and their context, right? There's the old story of the Sienna chief engineer who drove minivans all over North America trying to better understand their customer and what they needed, which led to a lot of cup holders and things that were new. No, it actually led to a lot of innovations on the Sienna back at that time. That continues. And so, but it's not just the chief engineer that develops that learning plan. It's these other functional leads on the program who have to learn how to deliver the vision of the chief engineer, and who will also experiment during that study phase to make sure they understand how they're going to actually deliver that in a pragmatic way. And then as you move into, as you start to move from the study phase to execution, we've talked a lot about set-based, right? And that's this idea of looking at multiple potential solutions, design solutions, deselecting and converging over time. And that whole process is a learning experience as you move forward, where the whole program learns and then can share across programs. And then finally, and there's lots more examples, but the reflection or Hansai, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, Mark, but something like that, that takes place at actually at critical milestones within the program and at the end of the program, where they capture lessons learned and then share that both, again, within and across product lines. So yeah, a lot of focus on effective learning.
How about you?
I don't know. I don't know if it's a good analogy. You kind of asking two guys like, how do people effectively eat? I mean, it's like
Yeah.
it's so fundamental
Yeah.
and integral to the, I think, to the how things work. At least in Toyota, it was. I mean,
Well, let me put it this way then.
yeah.
So,
No, I'm not trying to criticize what you said, but
well, one of my questions is, because the fact of the matter is, with both hoshin kanri and LPPD, or any kind of program, product program, like, the cycle times are very long. And so, learning happens along the way, of course, and it gets built into the process, Jim, like you just explained, that at milestones or critical integration points. I mean, the same thing is happening inside like an annual hoshin plan execution. But then the use of that learning, the use of that insight may not come around for a while, right? It may not be relevant until 12 months from now, or it may not be relevant until 4 years from now, in the case of like a model change within automotive. So how about, I guess, in addition to kind of how are the mechanisms supporting the learning, how is that learning getting captured, and then how is that learning being presented kind of just in time to whomever may need it 12 months from now, 4 years from now, 10 years from now? I don't know.
Well, what I was going to say after making that snarky remark was that I think fundamentally in all this stuff, learning is experiential. And I mean, so the engineers, Jim talking about in Toyota, the management, all of the hoshin, it's learned through. I mean, and hoshin in Toyota involves a lot of people at all levels of management. But primarily, they're learning the process and learning how to deliver on the process through experiencing it. I mean, there is a class you can take in Toyota about hoshin kanri, introduces you to the fundamental principles when you get in. But fundamentally, you learn it through the job. But it's a good point you made, Josh, about like the cadence. It does happen on a fairly long cycle. It's not like learning standardized work where you may repeat your cycle every 60 seconds. The cycle is long, and but I think that speaks a little bit to our earlier points of you can shorten that cycle through like when we talked about the OBEA and how you judge progress and confirm that things are going to plan is valuable. But in hoshin, and I think this is probably, I'm going to venture to say, Jim, it's a little less true in your area. But in hoshin, these are and I'm going to speak to two. We only reviewed the hoshin twice a year. We didn't have an OBEA reviewing it monthly. In fact, we at one point went to annually, we reviewed it. So, because part of the learning of an expectation of a leader is you're gonna learn through the process of actually executing on this yourself, and you may stumble, and things may not go so well. Of course, these are often big corporate initiatives, so that, you don't want them to completely fail, but a component within that initiative might not go so well. So let's allow part of this is allowing leaders to kind of develop too, so that they have a little bit of flexibility and ability to take risk with the necessary support if they need it.
And Jim, how about you with the use of that, putting that learning, putting those insights into use?
So there's a number of mechanisms to do that. You could embed what you learned in an updated standard architecture. It might change your commonality plan, the way you share parts across programs or within programs. You might learn things about, let's say, lightweighting in new materials that you'll share at technical reviews. Design reviews are a great way to capture those lessons. You might embed that knowledge in your PDP, which is your individual part development plan, so that the next time somebody uses that, it'll have an updated lesson in it. You might embed it in SmartCAD, the way that AI is become more prevalent in product development, both in the CAD and simulation. We're constantly learning and updating those models. That's another powerful way to capture that learning. You want to embed that learning in sort of a user-friendly way, as opposed to just creating these, huge books of knowledge or whatever companies call them. You want to try to embed it in the process and the way that the work is done so it can be most effective.
That's great. So I want to be respectful of time. I've got gobs and gobs of more questions that I could ask. Maybe one or two more, if it's okay, guys. So my first question, I'm going to kind of make this up on the spot, but I guess I'm curious, as you think about kind of each other's area of expertise or each other's kind of perspective, what would you say in your experience, Mark, or Jim, we'll start with you. In your experience working with LPPD, whether it was your experience as a practitioning leader, executive at places like Ford or Rivian, or just in the work that you've done to support executives in that way, what would be among the things that you see, I guess, deficiencies or gaps or kind of, challenges that many organizations deal with LPPD that perhaps could be addressed, or where there's learning that could be taken from hoshin kanri to kind of incorporate into that LPPD, those LPPD practices, and then similarly, Mark, what is it that maybe you perceive out of the LPPD body of knowledge, or what you've just seen in good product development examples over the year that might support organizations with some of the challenges or the struggles that they're having with strategy, let's say. So Jim, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think that hoshin kanri, or a good strategy deployment mechanism, is there's sort of two failure modes that I see fairly often. One is an organization will have a strategy deployment process, but it's treated separate from product development. It's something that manufacturing does, right? It's part of the sort of lean world of manufacturing. And so there might be an effective hoshin there that really doesn't include the PD guys, quote unquote. And so I think clearly organizations are missing a huge opportunity by not integrating that, as Mark said right from the beginning, thinking about how to deliver this strategy across, by leveraging all of the functions, working together, collaborating, whatever like that. And then the second failure mode is they don't really have one at all, or it's done by department, right? There might be kind of somebody knows something about an X matrix or somebody, whatever, and they'll do some sort of partial, I don't know, they read something or whatever, and they'll try to do it within their division. But again, really isolated, which again, I'm far from an expert, but in my mind kind of flies in the face of hoshin kanri, which is about focusing the entire organization. And so I think those two failure modes are what I see most often. And I think it makes them far less effective in their product development capability.
And then how about within product development itself? Are there aspects of LPPD that you see in practice where, I don't know, there's a missing sort of strategy aspect to that perhaps good hoshin kanri practice could help the LPPD executives or leadership be more effective with product?
For sure, this sort of the needs of the business that Mark talked about, right? Mm-hmm. Delivering on the business requirements. The best way to communicate that is through an effective strategy deployment process, so that you're thinking about, again, how all the way down to the individual engineer, how their work is going to contribute to this bigger idea, right? How this is going to contribute to the overall success of the business. Without that strategy deployment, I think it's harder to make that connection. And you can end up with fairly chaotic product development organizations, because each, let's say, product line is just focusing on, sort of their specific view of the world and the needs of that product line, or worse yet, focusing only on the needs of a specific product and not looking at how these pieces all fit together. And I think, at least in my mind and my not great understanding, Mark, I think one of the important things that hoshin does is put those puzzle pieces together, right? Or at least that's the challenge of the executive team, is to look at how those pieces can best work together.
Mark, how about you? And kind of both sides, like, what are some of the things that you see when working with organizations on the product development side of things, and then things that you have seen kind of working well in product development that perhaps could inform improvement on the strategy side?
I want to speak a little bit to like one of the more impactful things to answer this question in my career in Toyota, and it was like in the first couple of years I was in Toyota. I joined Toyota in 1988. It was the middle of the bubble era in Japan, where Toyota could sell anything it could make, and most car companies could. And then all of a sudden in 91, that bubble burst, and the company had to change direction and did change direction in the course of like 6 months. And I was working in product planning at the time. Official title was Overseas Planning Division, but basically we were the conduit between chief engineers and the overseas markets on what overseas markets would say, this is the kind of Corolla we want, and the chief engineers would say, sorry, you can't have that. You might have to get something similar to that. But in the course of that, like 6 months to a year, the entire engineering organization, each chief engineer I had a chance to interact with, changed completely their focus from not only developing the best product, but developing the best product with the least variation, which meant really focusing on what the customer wants, but instead of having 12 colors, we have 6 because that significantly reduces both development and production costs. And we were slower, I mean, to a certain extent, but I mean, overseas distributors, of course, had to adjust. But meeting to meeting, that just became consistent because it was on the hoshin. I mean, the company had to tighten its belt, and every function within the organization had to reduce costs. And for engineering, that was a primary thing that was focused on. So the other part of your question, and I don't see that in a lot of organizations, that ability to make that kind of adjustment.
Yeah.
I think some of that is because there is no, like Jim was speaking to, overall governing kind of like hoshin. But I would, on the other hand, too, I mean, one of the things that Toyota recognizes is that, and many organizations recognize the product it is really the driver of success for the organization. So there have been times clearly where Toyota has, like, I would say, tried to ensure that they put product like as in the forefront of the company. I mean, I'm reminded of, like, and this was, I remember when I was working in Toyota, I can't remember the timing, but Mr. Uchiyamada, who had originally developed the Prius, became the CEO of and chief engineer had never become CEO of Toyota because mostly it was business people or a Toyota family member. So I think that was an example of Toyota, like, realizing that they really needed to put product in front of everything. And I think to a certain extent, even when Akio came in and all this TNGA stuff became, even though he was a Toyota family member, I believe he really said, look, Toyota needs to put more product first, and not, product not only in terms of quality, which Toyota always did, but in terms of design, in terms of like quality of customer engagement and understanding. So I don't know if that answers your question, Josh, but
I think this is all very good. I really appreciate both you guys taking the time to sit down and
cool.
Sort of engage with this provocation, I guess, on my part. I mean, I'm in such a privileged position, getting to be a part of the LEI team, to get to work with people like you across these various disciplines and areas that aren't part of my background, like engineering and product development, or like strategy and kind of executive leadership, and I just thought some of these questions or ideas have occurred to me. Perhaps others out there who are similarly, like, not as deep in their experience and expertise as you two, may have similar questions or ideas, and just to kind of explore these things, not just within sort of the silo of strategy and executive leadership, or just within the silo of engineering and product development, but kind of looking across the aisle, so to speak. I thought would make for an interesting exploration, and I appreciate you guys being up for it. I think we've covered a lot of territory today. I had a question in here, but I think over the course of our conversation, we've more or less touched upon it, which is ideas for kind of how to bring these two things closer together within organizations. But I think from your experiences and just your explanations of the various kind of fundamental thinking, basic ideas, and then some of the practices that we've covered, I think we've touched upon a lot of ways in which these things do relate to each other, do have similarities, are different for sure, but could be better integrated, and in fact are quite well integrated within a company like Toyota, of course, and then some of the others that we've gotten a chance to work with and support over the course of the year. So anyway, that was my long wind up here, long closeout, but I really do appreciate you guys coming together and having this conversation, and who knows, perhaps we'll find time for a round 2. I'll come up with some other provocation. We'll get somebody from a shop floor who's like deeply steeped in fundamental practices of TPS in manufacturing to join the conversation, and and I'll make a similar.
That sounds interesting.
I'll make a similar declaration that all this stuff is just the same. What do you guys talk about? Let's all get in the same room, same Obeya, things like that. Anyway, thanks guys. Appreciate the time. And
My
hope
pleasure.
folks enjoy the conversation.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Jim. It was great.
Thanks. Good talking to you guys.
Great talking. Yeah.